Jesus, the Christian Messiah. One of his disciples has long been blamed for his death. The motive? 30 pieces of silver. But did Judas really betray his master for money? Did he even exist? Scrutinize the Gospels, and other suspects with credible motives emerge from the shadows. Vindictive priests, a brutal Roman governor, rival preachers, and a murderous prince. After 2,000 years, it is time to reopen the case files. The crucifixion of Jesus launched a religion that would sweep the world. The Easter story of his final 5 days in Jerusalem is fundamental to Christian faith. It is the tale of an innocent Savior, Jesus Christ, framed by an evil traitor, Judas Iscariot. But what if history has condemned the wrong man for the death of Jesus? Jerusalem, the scene of the crime. Somewhere in these streets, Judas is supposed to have taken money to betray his master.
I understand you need information.
No one disputes that someone engineered the death of Jesus. But biblical scholars from around the world don't all agree that it was Judas.
I think when we're looking at a figure like Judas, we have to ask ourselves, is there any sort of historical basis to Judas?
It's a sad thing that Christian history poured more and more hatred on Judas, and that's a fact.
Judas Iscariot, we're told, goes out and makes a bargain with the ruling priests. And I think that's very historical. That makes good sense.
A team of historians and theologians will lead a cold case investigation. They will pore over the 4 Gospels of the New Testament and forensically examine the iconic scenes of the Passion Week.
One of the biggest challenges for scholars on the historical Jesus is deciding why Jesus died and who was responsible.
They will compare the Gospels to each other and against historical sources.
My task is to go through and how can I strip out the theology and find evidence of real history.
They will put together profiles of every suspect. Some of them surprising, but entirely plausible.
Was Pontius Pilate responsible? Was the Jewish hierarchy responsible? Was Judas Iscariot responsible? Were the crowds responsible? Who was responsible for the death of Jesus? This is one of the mysteries that scholars try to delve into, and not surprisingly, different scholars come up with different answers.
It is the week of Passover, around the year 33 AD. Just outside the gates of Jerusalem, Jesus has arrived with his entourage of disciples.
I see Jesus as somebody who has tremendous charismatic energy.
People were awestruck in his presence and sensed being near him that there was something very special.
Jesus is one of hundreds of thousands of Jews who have flocked to the city from across the Holy Land for the most important Jewish festival of the year.
The week of Passover in Jerusalem must have been a madhouse.
Don't you forget that in the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, you must go. You must go to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover, and you must do it every year.
But according to the Gospels, this year is different, because Jesus of Nazareth is about to usher in a new kingdom of God.
Go to the village. Just as you'll enter, you'll see a young colt. Untie it and bring it back. Okay?
The Gospels tell that Jesus fulfills the Old Testament prophecy that astride a donkey, the Messiah will ride in triumph into Jerusalem. For 3 years, he has been preaching his egalitarian message in the villages of Galilee in the rural north. Here in Jerusalem, he is drawing even larger crowds.
He was clearly in touch with the needs of the people. Had grown up poor himself, grew up in a peasant setting, and he had apparently had an acute sensitivity to the suffering of the people.
But the 4 Gospels reveal that there are several men here who are threatened by his message and his power over the people. These are the suspects. Caiaphas, the high priest of the great temple. He presides over all religious affairs in Jerusalem.
This was a man of wealth, a man of privilege, a man of power. This is a priestly dynasty that dominated the first century. Even Rome defers to Caiaphas' authority when it's in the temple precincts.
Rome has ruled here for 30 years. This Passover week, Caiaphas cannot tolerate any disturbance to the peace. His Roman master will not allow it. Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, has just arrived from his coastal home in Caesarea. He is not here to enjoy the festivities. He is here to maintain law and order.
Poor Pilate. I imagine him already in a bad mood by the time he gets to town. He comes up with about 3,000 troops. He's responsible for making sure that this whole madhouse runs in an orderly way and everybody gets home safely.
And there are others in Jerusalem who want Jesus out of the way. The Pharisees, an Orthodox Jewish sect that has clashed with Jesus repeatedly for 3 years. Pharisee preachers think Jesus is too liberal and too popular.
We know that some of the Pharisees, it's a wide group, some of the Pharisees are embarrassing Jesus. They're trying to trick him. And probably they're jealous. The man has a following.
But even some of Jesus' own followers may have grown tired of his pacifist teaching. Many Jews here in Jerusalem want to strike out against the Romans who occupy their city. And finally, Herod Antipas, the son of King Herod the Great. Antipas, the ruler of Galilee, has been hunting Jesus for months.
I suspect Antipas has his own interests in mind and just wanted to make sure Jesus got disposed of properly.
As the week unfolds, each one of Jesus' enemies will show his face. Jesus heads straight to the great temple of Jerusalem. Historians say understanding what happened here is the key to discovering who framed Jesus.
Master, look.
His actions here this day will bring his enemies out of the shadows.
Come.
To Jesus, the temple is supposed to be a house of God. But the Gospels say it was run by a clan of crooked priests and was filled with cheats and charlatans. In the temple, pilgrims can only buy animals for sacrifice with local coins. This leaves them wide open to exploitation from the unscrupulous money changers.
Jesus would be furious. The one thing we know about Jesus, he's always going to fight for the small person. He is going to give his life for them. He would be furious that the people are getting cheated.
Is it not written that my house shall be called a house of prayer? And you are making this into a den of thieves. This looks like a bazaar.
This action of Jesus encapsulates so well the message that he had been preaching in Galilee throughout his ministry, that the status quo, the rulers who are in charge now, are corrupt, and that God is going to overthrow them and bring in something new.
According to gospel tradition, the rulers in charge, the high priests of the temple, were outraged by Jesus' violent protest.
What action are we taking?
The priests allowed the money changers to operate in the temple, and they profited from the swindling. But it wasn't just the priests who took offense. After the incident in the temple, the Romans, the Pharisees, and Herod Antipas all had the ammunition they needed to plot against Jesus. But which one actually framed Jesus? The Gospels claim it was someone from his inner circle, Judas Iscariot. For 2,000 years, one man above all others has been blamed for the death of Jesus. One of his own disciples, Judas Iscariot. All four Gospels claim Judas betrayed Jesus to the priests for money. They don't specify where or from whom he took the bribe, but historians can hazard a guess.
The city of Jerusalem was teeming with people at this time of year, so it would have been very easy for Judas Iscariot to go to one of the opulent estates of a ruling priest and talk to a servant, meet somebody at the gate and say, listen, I understand that there's interest in obtaining some information.
I may have some for you. I can lead you to him soon.
According to gospel tradition, the night after Judas took the money, Jesus and his disciples gathered for the Passover meal. The Last Supper is one of the most iconic scenes in Christian tradition. Here, Jesus prophesies Judas's betrayal.
What's been written shall be fulfilled. The one who eats bread with me will turn against me. One of you shall betray me.
Ask who he means.
It's the man I give this piece of bread to.
the Gospel of John, Judas slips off into the darkness to tip off the priests where Jesus can be found later that night.
Go. Do what you have to do. Do it quickly.
What was Judas's motive?
I guess the man was greedy. I guess he just had a love for money. Maybe it's all part of the great plan. These are efforts that you see in the Gospels to come to terms with a very embarrassing fact. One of the 12 betrayed Jesus.
Later that night, in the Garden of Gethsemane, just outside the city walls, Jesus' prophecy is fulfilled.
You can do all things if you can let this chalice pass from me, Father. Father, you can do all things if you can let this chalice pass from me.
Sleeping, come on, get up. The traitor is among us.
Master?
Friend, do what you're here to do.
Judas identifies Jesus to a party of temple guards who the priests have sent to arrest him.
You betray the Son of Man with a kiss.
But did Judas really betray Jesus? Some historians point to major flaws in the case against Judas. The first comes from the Gospel of John, which states that Judas was the treasurer of the group.
He's in the group. He's one of the leaders. The motive cannot be, as Matthew says, he wants money. Well, he was in charge of the money. All he had to do was say, back of my hands to you guys, this didn't work, I'm taking off with the money. And he would have much more money than the few little coins that we hear about, 30 pieces of silver, big deal.
But if not for money, is there another motive for Judas's betrayal buried in the Gospels? Days before, on their way to Jerusalem, Jesus made Judas and the other disciples a promise. They, his chosen 12, would rule with him over an all-new kingdom of God on earth.
How do you prepare yourselves? One can easily imagine that as time went on and there was no evidence that this kingdom was going to arrive, some of them may have felt some kind of anger maybe or disappointment. And so it's not at all surprising that there are traditions that at least one of these 12 was so disaffected that he turned against the cause.
If he was disillusioned, Judas may have snapped when they reached Jerusalem, the center of political and religious power. Historians agree that Jerusalem seethed with political insurrectionists, desperate to be rid of their Roman overlords.
We've got Jerusalem as if it's a volcano. It's bubbling. Something's going to explode.
Even traditionalists believe this could have inspired Judas to act.
The city has a rebel element within it, and Judas Iscariot had to have been exposed to that. And I suspect it influenced some of his thinking. I can imagine Judas Iscariot hearing people say, "What has your Jesus done? He's healed a few people, but is he going to throw the Roman yoke off of us? Is he going to change things for the better for Israel?"
When Jesus stormed into the temple, was Judas hoping this violent demonstration would turn into a full-scale rebellion?
Not now, not now.
Judas watches. In the temple, hey, this is my hero. He's done it. What's the matter, Jesus? What are you doing now? It's not the time to pray. This is the time to strike. This is the time to win the battle. Don't you understand? You've been saying all along, you're fighting Satan. You're bringing in God's kingdom. Jesus, come on.
Could Judas's frustration with Jesus explain his secret visit to an agent of the high priests to sell out his master?
If you were to have met Judas as he's on his way to meet the agent of the high priest, and if you were to stop him and say, Judas, how can you do this? How can you betray your master? I think he would have said, I betray him? He has betrayed us.
There is evidence in the Gospels that the disciples were getting mixed messages from their leader. Christian tradition has it that Jesus' movement was pacifist, but the Gospel of Luke reveals the opposite. At the Last Supper, seemingly too late for Judas, Jesus makes a blatant call to arms.
When I've sent you out in your bare feet, without money, without food, did you ever want for anything? No. Well, now it's different. If you've got money, take it with you, and your bags. And if you don't have a sword, sell your coat and buy one.
Master, we have 2 swords here.
In time. In time.
So if Judas was the culprit, was it for money, or did a restless militancy lead him to betray his master? Either way, the Gospel of Matthew has Judas so racked with guilt, he hangs himself. But is it possible that the Gospel writers invented not only the motive of money for Judas's betrayal, but also Judas himself? If Judas did frame Jesus because he wanted to rise up against the Romans, then why is he always presented as having betrayed Jesus for money? When the 4 Gospels are laid down in the order they were written, a striking pattern emerges. The character of Judas becomes progressively more greedy and more villainous. In the first Gospel to be written, Mark, Judas takes money as a bribe. In the second, Matthew, it's spelt out exactly how much, 30 pieces of silver. But in the third and fourth, Luke and John, Judas does not just betray Jesus for money. Judas betrays Jesus because he is possessed by the devil.
By the time we get to Luke, Satan enters into Judas. And by the time we get to John, he is really an embodiment of the forces of darkness.
So why would the Gospels quite literally demonize Judas? The answer may lie in when and where the Gospels were written. A generation after the death of Jesus, Christianity had spread around the Mediterranean and reached as far as Rome. But openly calling yourself Christian in the capital of the empire could cost you your life. Roman chronicles say the Emperor Nero used Christians as human torches to light his garden. He also devised a diabolical new form of entertainment, feeding Christians to the lions. and Christians, still considered a breakaway sect of Judaism, were not just being persecuted by the Romans, they were also being rejected by their fellow Jews.
The church felt severe persecution at this time, and at the same time couldn't take sanctuary in the synagogue because they were being driven away from the synagogue because they were viewed as heretics.
In the decades after the death of Jesus, early Christians were members of a largely underground movement. They met behind closed doors to share stories of Jesus' life and death.
These persecutions of Christians obviously had an effect on how Christians understood themselves and their traditions. When Christians told stories about Jesus being persecuted and put on trial and executed, they were telling these stories through the lenses that were provided by the history of their own persecutions.
But the whole political landscape was about to change radically. In Jerusalem in 66 AD, the Jews rose up in rebellion against their Roman occupiers. In retaliation, hundreds of thousands of Jews were massacred. The holy city was set ablaze, and the great temple was razed to the ground.
I mean, this is like September 11. This is unbelievable. I mean, that's the one thing that they knew is there for eternity, and the destruction of this is shocking to everybody.
Many historians now believe that when the early Christians first wrote down their stories of Jesus in the form of the Gospels, they had to make a difficult strategic decision. Should they side with their old mother religion, Judaism, or should they align themselves with Rome?
The Gospels being written in light of the First Jewish War are asking themselves, to a certain extent, where do we belong? Are we a part of this vanquished people? Are we a part of the Jews who have recently so thoroughly been put down by the Romans? Or is there any way to argue that we are not opposed to Rome? We are not opposed to the empire?
If it was politically expedient for the gospel writers to cozy up to Rome, one way to accomplish this would be to demonize a key Jewish player in the Jesus story. Some experts take this argument even further. The character of Judas seems so contrived to them that they question whether he existed at all.
We all have to confront the question, is Judas a creation of a literary story? Well, you can argue it is. You need a protagonist, that's Jesus. You need an antagonist, that would be Judas. Now you've got a pretty good story.
The fact that Judas's name is Yehuda, Jew, is another reason why you might wonder if he's a cipher for evil rather than an actual person.
But this view is not shared by all experts.
Who is going to make up a story about Jesus appointing one of the disciples who betrays him? There's just no way.
I think Judas was a real character, and I'm sure that he was portrayed and later perceived throughout generations the way it was perceived because it was a personification of evil, just as Jesus is the personification of the ultimate good.
Whatever the historical truth, the Judas story has become central to Christian belief. But if the role of Judas was distorted or even invented by the gospel writers to distance themselves from the Jews, then who did frame Jesus? If the prime suspect behind Jesus' death, Judas Iscariot, was a literary device, then the murder investigation is thrown wide open.
If the kingdom comes tomorrow, are you ready?
There were other suspects in Jerusalem that week, with compelling motives to see Jesus dead.
If you wake up, and in the morning
For 2 days now, Jesus has been preaching in every corner of the temple. Here, he will cross swords with an old enemy, the Pharisees. For 3 years in Galilee, Jesus had raged against the Pharisees, a religious sect of Jewish hardliners who strictly upheld the traditions of the Torah. Jesus believed they were upholding the letter, but not the spirit of the law.
The Pharisees wanted people to stay in the kind of state of purity all the time that was really only required in the temple. And Jesus, he disagreed with that. He disagreed with having to wash your hands all the time. He disagreed with their strict Sabbath rules. You can't even pick a kernel of wheat to eat. And so, yeah, he was there. He was probably their major antagonist.
According to the Gospel of Mark, the Pharisees were out to destroy Jesus and planned a trap for him.
Master, I have a question. You are an honest man. We know that. You teach us none but God's law. So, my question is, should we or should we not pay taxes to the Roman Emperor?
The Pharisee was trying to get Jesus to publicly denounce the Roman occupation and the emperor, an offense punishable by death.
You hypocrites. Why are you trying to catch me? Show me a coin. A coin.
Yeah, show him a coin.
Show me a coin. Whose head is this?
Caesar.
Whose head? Whose inscription?
Caesar.
Then pay Caesar what is due to Caesar, and pay God what is due to God.
When his answer is to the Pharisees, they're not very happy because it looks like he is smarter, stronger, and clearer than they are. And their attempt to embarrass him has embarrassed them.
For years, Jesus had been attracting followers from the Pharisees in Galilee. Now in the holy city itself, Jesus publicly tears them apart.
You call yourselves defenders of the Torah. You Pharisees. You're like tombs smeared with whitewash. They look fine from the outside, but inside they're full of bones and filth. You snakes, you viper's nest. You think you can escape being sent to hell?
The Pharisees' attempt to trap him failed, but some experts suggest the incident may have heightened their resolve to get rid of Jesus.
What is the logical human reaction when you're embarrassed? We're going to join the group that's going to get rid of this man. He's embarrassing to us. And come on. We are the great teachers. Everybody knows it. We're the Pharisees. So, yeah, I think who framed Jesus? Let's admit some Pharisees could have been behind it.
Once again, this theory seems plausible to some experts, but not to others.
The idea that the Pharisees would have been walking around Jerusalem, rubbing their hands together and trying to find a way to arrest Jesus, trying to find a way to frame him, as it were. When in reality, they may have had theological disagreements with him, they certainly did, but their involvement wouldn't have been at that level. They weren't political power players at that time.
If the Pharisees did not have the political clout to take action against Jesus, who did? From the moment he set foot in Jerusalem, Jesus stirred up a hornet's nest. Whether it was Judas or the Pharisees who betrayed Jesus,
You are making this into a den of thieves!
the Gospels all point to one mastermind behind his arrest and murder: the high priest Caiaphas. News of Jesus' outburst in the temple had come to the attention of Caiaphas.
This man is fast becoming a legend. We need to find some pretext to seize him and halt this before it goes any further.
I think what Caiaphas saw was that in Jesus and his Galilean following, there was the danger that it might catch on in Judea also. There was the danger that a rebellion could break out. There could be calls for replacing Caiaphas and company as the ruling priest.
If we are to take him, let's do it before the festival starts. Otherwise, we may have rioting on our hands.
According to all four Gospels, on Thursday night, Caiaphas makes his move. Caiaphas' temple guards have arrested Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane and brought him back to the city. According to 3 of the Gospels, they mock and beat Jesus before dragging him up to the lavish quarters of the high priest. Here, Caiaphas awaits him with the other members of the Jewish High Council, the Sanhedrin.
Are you the Christ? Are you the Son of the Blessed? Do you have no answer?
According to all but the Gospel of John, Caiaphas' motive for arresting and interrogating Jesus is simple. Caiaphas presided over the temple. He was incensed that Jesus had invaded his turf and overturned the money changers' tables.
Is it not written that my house shall be called a house of prayer?
The case against Caiaphas stands or falls on the credibility of this pivotal event in the temple. Christian tradition has it that Jesus' actions were so dramatic that he cleansed the temple of corruption. But some experts look at the physical structure of the area and doubt whether one man could have caused such a conspicuous commotion.
The temple is an enormous area. You can fit 25 American football fields inside the precincts of the temple.
And with so many pilgrims in Jerusalem for Passover, the temple would have been jam-packed.
If you think of an airport just before Christmas Eve, that's the human density we're speaking of. If Jesus had done something like the temple incident, I wonder how many people could have even seen him. Would people 50 feet away from him have been able to see what happened? Who possibly could have seen the action?
There's another reason that experts question the historical accuracy of the temple incident. Many scholars believe all the Gospels were written after the Great Temple of Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. Some suggest that the temple incident in the Gospels is a metaphor for the destruction of the temple over 35 years after the death of Jesus.
When Christians were Jews, which is the case, I think, with the gospel writers, that was an event they really had to make religiously meaningful. And one of the ways they do this is by weaving the destruction of the temple into their stories about the death of Jesus. Turning over tables, symbolizes a kind of destruction. It makes something topsy-turvy. And what these gospel writers are trying to account for is why the temple is destroyed.
There is one final piece of evidence that suggests Jesus' outburst in the temple cannot have been the reason why Caiaphas had him arrested. In the Gospel of John, Jesus does overturn the money changers' tables. It's just that he does it 3 years earlier on a completely unrelated visit to Jerusalem. And there are no consequences whatsoever.
This place looks like a bazaar.
If the temple incident was written to make sense of an event that happened decades later, then it begs the question, did the incident happen at all? And if there was no disturbance in the temple that week, then Caiaphas' motive to have Jesus put to death disappears. But the case against Caiaphas, the high priest, is not closed.